graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time non-stop.
Hello, Kyle, and welcome to Ph.D Hardtalk. I've received a few questions from some of our colleagues, and I will start with question one. So in your opinion, since you've talked about writing a book and publishing, etc., in your opinion, do you think that PhD students / researchers should be judged on how many articles they publish successfully online? What are your thoughts?
I think it's an interesting question, and my sort of general answer is sort of it depends. I think it depends on what sort of career avenue you're going to go. But from my framework, so I'll take it as someone who wants to be a tenure track and eventually tenured professor, that the contribution of scholars is to produce scholarship. That's what we do. So I think fundamentally research is a key aspect in evaluating the productivity and value of a work that someone is doing. I don't think it necessarily needs to be this sort of solo papered in the highest tier journal with the most sort of social status that it gives you. That's a framework that I think some people use. I care less about that. What I care is the sharing and spreading of ideas.
Yes.
Whether that be through books, podcasts, article writing, and various other forms of public engagement, whether that be speeches, conference presentations, public events, to talk about and spread the ideas that you are coming up with. Because fundamentally, research, the work that you do, is useless if you're not sharing it with anyone. Like, oh, cool, it's neat that I know this single thing about moral policing and neutral policing that's in Cincinnati, policing of public sex. It doesn't help anyone if I don't share that idea with people. It's just a neat thought that's occurred to me. So if you're going to be a scholar, you have to produce scholarship that is shared publicly. And a reality of, I think, any sort of academic discipline is that you will be evaluated by your peers when being granted tenure, promotions, or hired based on the work that you have produced. And that is almost the key point, is that anything else is below, at least for, I think, many committees, the work that you're done. That's sort of a reality. It's not necessarily the reality I would like it to be, because, right, scholars should also be teachers. Scholars should also do other forms of engagement that aren't just sitting in labs doing work in some ways. But the disciplines that we are in care about the work that we produce. So whether or not I think it's important, it is because the discipline says it is. So you're going to have to do it anyway.
Love that. Thank you. And I guess the next question is, personally, for yourself, do you feel fulfilled when you publish an article? From a mental health perspective, I know you've said that we have to, because the institution states we have to, and to get paid, we have to. We've got bills and responsibilities. But from your current situ, are you thinking, or do you feel like, oh my gosh, I've published that, that is amazing, I am whole?
Yeah, I think it is rewarding to send your work out for consideration, right? There's no guarantee that will be published, but even getting critical feedback on the work that you produce, whether that be through a peer review process at an academic journal, readers who read a manuscript text, or even just hard-hitting questions and a good Q&A at a conference presentation. I think there is significant value in having people appraise your work. You don't have to accept their sort of valuation of it. You could be, I mean, I've encountered people who hate the work that I do, whether that be because they're homophobic or don't care about the methods I use, right? There could be a whole range of things, from technical to moral reasons that people do not like research. But the process of doing work, I think, doing research, I think, is incredibly fulfilling when you are dedicated and care about the work that you do. And the sort of end point, I think, for all that work, at least in the academy, is to publish it or share it somehow. So I do think that is an incredibly rewarding experience, particularly when you can see that work being engaged with by your peers and those whose opinions you deeply respect and admire.
I like that response, so thank you. I guess one of the final questions. Currently with COVID-19, as you know, universities have had to think on their feet when it comes to our mental health and our well-being. And they've invested financially a lot of money, and maybe some haven't. I can't speak for all, but you know, they've had budgets and they've used the money. So in terms of forecast of future, do you think they should maintain the standard that they've started during COVID-19 in terms of offering us all of these services? And, you know, we had bonuses, didn't we? Bursaries, just to help us to buy, you know, a bit of, you know, takeaway here and there. But, you know, it helped us in terms of coping, or be it, you know, therapy, etc., you know, managing your money, managing your time, your inner thoughts. We've had all of those services in yoga, online, etc. So what are your thoughts on what's happened during COVID-19? Do you think it should carry forth or just stop?
Yeah, I mean, so I think coming from the American context and being most familiar with the University of Cincinnati, I think colleges and universities have made moderate steps to sort of benefit, aid students in terms of their mental health and sort of other resources that they need during a particularly trying, nearly impossible time to go as status quo, work as usual. Right. There was a 3-month period of time where I basically couldn't get any work done because I didn't know what research I was ever allowed to collect. And right, there's severe hardships happening. That said, I don't think universities do enough to support their students, particularly graduate students, I think. Right, we certainly get a scholarship in many instances that allows us to come here. I'm not sure what your stipend looked like when you were studying, but mine is not as impressive as I would like it to be, right? I have a roommate to subsidize my housing and bills. And the sort of resources available, I think, are still extremely limited for those who don't have resources elsewhere to find support that they need. So not only do I think the sort of programs implemented to aid during the pandemic should continue, I think they need to be more heavily funded and expand to help a greater degree of student body, particularly underserved students. We know that students of color, women students, queer students, international students are much less likely to have access to these resources for a variety of different reasons. But at the moment, I think schools could be doing a whole lot better. And that's just sort of from my experience, right? This is not something I study. It's not something I have empirical data on. But I am a conscious person who is aware of things, right? And you hear sort of horror stories about how students have to spend $800 to get a ADHD test or something like that. And I'm like, that's obscene. Also given the state of healthcare in this country, but that's an entire other issue that sort of connects with the problems that you're raising. But yeah, fundamentally, these programs absolutely should continue. Will they? I think we'll see very soon whether or not the support remains.
Okay, so if they were to say, for example, you were part of the committee and you were set there in the boardroom, if they were to say, what can we do to make it better? What are your 3 top suggestions? Even one will do. Hopefully a university somewhere will hear what it is we're saying.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, they don't like me on committees. So, I mean, fundamentally, in terms of mental health, there needs to be a direct financial investment that doubles, quadruples. There's not enough money for mental health support. At the University of Cincinnati, I think students are permitted 3 free individual sessions a year with a counselor if they're on the student health insurance for the university. And after that, they're sort of streamlined into these sort of groups based on the sort of problems that people are experiencing, whether that's time management and stress due to schoolwork, whether that's some sort of severe trauma that people are working through. And the focus is on pushing a lot of people with a lot of different problems into groups with each other, who we don't know how that's going to work out, with a single person who is responsible for managing that, right? That's a huge responsibility and caseload for that person. So fundamentally, there need to be more trained therapists, offices that could accommodate hundreds, if not thousands of students, depending on the size of the university. Really, fundamentally, is an investment in where people need it, I think. And that can be a lot of things, right? Paying your students more, or graduate students more at the very least, stipends, giving them scholarships that actually support their funding so they can actually, do the work that they need to do while they're here. I think there's a lot of things that could and should be done that aren't being done because that's not how administration run universities these days, right? They're business ventures that suck up cash from undergrads to fund sports programs and building initiatives. It's a sad reality, I think, of at least American universities, but it's the reality we live in. It's, that's sort of the world we're in.
The key points you've touched on, some of your colleagues have touched on in some of the interviews that I've done already. So you are right on point. And so, your sentiments are heard by myself, and they echoed the same thing. I guess one of the questions, how you've touched on international students, etc., certain groups, and that they don't really get the value added. They get into these universities, but the extra that's needed, the universities can't provide for whatever reason, we don't know. So in your opinion, would you say that getting a PhD or getting an MSc takes you away from poverty in terms of breaking the poverty cycle?
This is an interesting question. Also, not what I study, so I'll say what I see.
Yeah, it's an opinion. Someone said yes yesterday, and then someone said no the day before.
I think in this country, education used to be seen, at the very least, as a silver bullet to get yourself out of poverty. I don't think that's true anymore. With the sort of ongoing adjunctification of higher ed, where PhDs are hired on single-year contracts and not receiving tenure promotions or even wages that are appropriate for the degrees they had that people who 40 years ago would be earning, signifies a problem, right? You have people who are extremely educated, who have spent a decade or more in higher ed, becoming trained as scholars, researchers, teachers, who make basically the wages of an entry-level job in some instances because of this sort of adjunctification. I teach at a local private school as an adjunct, just because I like engaging with students and I don't want to abandon that. And I make $500 per credit hour of the 14-week course. So I'm getting paid $1,500 to teach it. That's obscene in terms of payments. And that's based on the sort of job ads that I see come out, standard for the adjunct position, right? That's not to say there isn't opportunity for social mobility. We see scholars, particularly in my discipline right now, there's been a sort of a boom currently, surprisingly, of tenure track jobs. And many of my colleagues have successfully placed in a tenure track career at equal level in sort of social rank of the institution, or even at higher levels in some instances, right? So it's possible, it's still possible to achieve, right? Is it for everyone? No. Is it for most people? Probably not. Yeah. I think there's value in a PhD. I'm getting one. That would be silly if I didn't believe in it.
Of course.
Yes, and I do think that training can be applied to other circumstances, particularly depending on what disciplines you sort of go into. but fundamentally, if the hope is I'm getting a PhD to rise out of poverty or to make $100,000 a year or even more, I think you're in the wrong career. If that's the only reason. I think PhDs are fulfilling. I think being a professor, if I ever so get to claim the title, would be incredibly fulfilling. Thank you. And I think finding fulfillment in that is perhaps the way to go, because I'm not quite sure that it's going to be economically the perhaps best choice given the current state of the economy.
So wise. I don't know how to react to your response, so I'll move on to the next question. I've got a lot of questions, but I genuinely understand what it is that you're saying, and I think it is a global pandemic in the sense of you expect A, but when you get there, it's actually Z. And then it's your mental health, because you've spent, like he said, 9 years or 10 years in education, and you've spent well over 100 grand, you know, in terms of your day-to-day, be it education or loans that you took out, and then you have the rest of your life to then pay it back. And some people are in education after 30, so therefore you won't really enjoy your retirement in a sense.
Yeah, I think a dangerous cost benefits analysis that you have to do to decide, is it the education you need, and is it worth the cost, whether that be future career opportunities and wages, and especially if you have to take out scholarships or loans on the front end if you're not having your school pay for by the university itself, because taking out $20,000 a year, that's a lot of money, and it adds up if you're self-funding through loans, right? I mean, if you have the resources to self-fund without taking out loans, good for you, but you're not really the people who I think are of most concern. Yeah, so I think it's a tough decision that people have to make when pursuing advanced degrees.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And last season, I used to ask this question, so I'm just going to ask it because you've just touched on it. Scholarship or self-fund? What's your opinion?
It's got to be. I mean, if you have the money to self-fund, do it. I mean, good for you. You probably have the social connections also to get scholarships paid for, so you don't have to use your own money to do so. But we'll ignore the social capital of that scenario. If you are someone like me, right, who comes from rural Ohio, from a working class family, I don't have the money to support that. I would have had to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans beyond the ones I'd already did for my undergrad, because that's how you pay for undergrad as a working class student. If I didn't have university funding for my MA and my PhD, I could not afford to be here. So fundamentally, I think, particularly for marginalized scholars, whether that be on the basis of race, gender, sexuality, or nationality, getting that scholarship is fundamental, I think, to doing your work. I think there are ways to demonstrate your capability and worth to doing so, and hopefully you are applying to programs that see value in the work that you do. I got lucky finding the University of Cincinnati. I think our sociology department, despite its sort of mid-tier ranking, is one of the best in the country because it allows the students here to do what they want to do. I have never felt that my research was stigmatized or devalued by my peers and my professors. So I think finding a place that welcomes and supports you, and then financially supports you, literally, you have to have the money. It's a key, despite how much I wish college were free in this country, it's not. But financial support, social support, I think are key for finding the place where you belong if you pursue higher education.
No, I like that. Thank you very much for sharing your opinion. I think it's quite important also because you have international students, like you touched on, who have sponsors who sponsor them then coming to the country, but then they have to work because the sponsor only sponsors the education. So essentially you are self-funded, because then when you finish, you have to pay it back. And then you have certain governments as well that will say you can go abroad university, 5 years, finish your PhD. When you come back, you have to give us back 5 years worth of service
Precisely,
before
yeah.
you can start your life. So in a sense, you're in a prison cell for that 10-year. Because then, I've got a bit of freedom for 5 years, and then when I go back, I have to give in 12 hours of my day or 16 hours of my day to give back to the States. So thank you very much for your response. You'll be glad to know that this is the last question.
Oh, phenomenal. I'm excited.
So do you think, in your opinion, Ph.D Hardtalk is benefiting researchers like yourself and me? Or do you think, no, but that's it, done, cut, pack up and go?
Before you and Megan reached out to me, I'd not heard of Ph.D Hardtalk. In preparation for the interview, I watched a few videos, and I already see such immense value in the words and ideas that you and those you've interviewed have shared. I apologize for the police outside. I'm trying to have a nice moment.
Right. My dog's been chewing on her little toy. Did you hear it? I was there like throwing a pen.
But I think this program and programs like it are so valuable because they allow PhD students to communicate with those who they would never ever see or watching just a video just before this interview, I think was someone who is from geography, if I remember correctly, which is, despite being related to space and my interest, not a discipline I really engage with. And I think their ideas have been really inspiring, and I'm gonna immediately follow them on Twitter after the interview. I've through watching the videos, appreciated your insights and questions, especially coming from a sort of literature background that you do. Sort of seeing the different ways people think and interpret ideas and concepts, and what sort of questions they think to ask, because there's such value in a different perspective on the topics. I spend a lot of time talking to sociologists, particularly sexuality scholars in the discipline. And we all have more or less similar ideas on how things are and how they should be and how the research should be done. So being able to interact with you and also others outside of my discipline and sort of peer groups, I think is such a valuable experience. And I think for the watchers or viewers, an incredibly valuable use of their time to see how people who are perhaps further along in their programs and their research approach the topics of scholarship and everyday life in the academy.
It's quite interesting and quite rich, so I don't have anything to add to that, so I'll just leave it as it is. I'd like to say thank you so much for joining me on Ph.D Hardtalk, Project Dissemination to the World. Your information will be at the bottom of the video, and on LinkedIn, Twitter, IG, TikTok. Follow us on socials. We've always got something fun to share with you, and I've learned a lot today, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a privilege.
Elevated, now it's my time to shine. Yeah, let's